On this program, you'll have the unique opportunity to listen in on a remarkable conversation with 4 inspiring guests, all of whom have been convicted of serious crimes and have spent years in prison. However, while in prison, each got involved in a tremendously successful program called Rehabilitation through the Arts, and it changed their lives then and now. The recidivism rate for RTA alumni is 7% compared to the national average of around 60%. And on this program, they'll share their very personal experiences with our American criminal justice system. This is America and the World is brought to you by Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology, sharing tomorrow. The Washington Diplomat, a world of news and perspective. The Sultanate of Oman. The U.S.-China Education Trust and F.Y. Chang Foundation, Julia Chang Block, President. The Rotendaro Family Trust. The Forerunner Foundation, dedicated to forward-thinking public policy. And the Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. I think we're all in for a good conversation. You agree?
Absolutely.
Will you support me on that one, huh?
Yes.
Absolutely.
This is your conversation, okay? I'm an older white male. You've heard enough from older white males for a long time. So I'm going to step out of the way and get us going, drop in, ask a question from time to time. But it's your show, okay? So just go for it, have a good time. And we'll get to know each other as we go along, huh? Okay? You've all spent some time in prison.
Yes.
The prison system in America. Talk a little bit about that. Does it work? Does it not work? There is crime. There's punishment. There's rehabilitation. I'll drop it onto the table. Charles, lead us off.
Sure. I, for one, believe in the criminal justice system. I would hope that we would have a fair and just criminal justice system. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. People do crime. There's consequences for what you do, but in a system, it should be fair. You know, one of the things that I've learned about being incarcerated is that it's an enclosed system. There's very little oversight, and things happen inside a prison that the average American probably have heard of, but when you live there and see it, it's really, really terrible. And that's the unjust part that I don't like about the criminal justice system, because when you try to, as a person who used to be incarcerated, when you try to state what has happened or try to bring it to the attention of the authorities, you put yourself in jeopardy of being, retaliated against. Sometimes your story is not believed, and sometimes you just transferred right out of the facility to keep you quiet.
Let me get, I'm so glad that we have 2 women, 2 men.
Yes.
Judah, jump in.
The criminal justice system right now is, it's in a state of, I feel I'm discouraged by it. For the sense that on a daily basis, there are people who are being exonerated. And in a sense, if you think of exoneration, and you think those people were found guilty by a criminal justice system, the jury, the judge, the public, and then they're exonerated, how many more people are not exonerated but are taking plea deals, who are doing the time? They have unjust sentences, some draconian sentences. Then you have to think about rehabilitation. We don't have a bar set as to what is the measurement, basically, for rehabilitation. At what point do we believe a person, according to their crime, is truly rehabilitated? I find that if you have 25 years, there's a possibility that when we talk about recidivism, going out and then coming back in, well, at what point does someone go backwards while in their rehabilitation if they are looking at multiple boards in which, parole boards in which they get hit which means they do another 2 years and go back again.
Let me get
Right.
Anitria?
Anitria.
Anitria.
Yes, sir.
Anitria. Thank you for helping me on that. So talk a little bit about the criminal justice system. How about prison, inside prison?
My experience in prison has been actually daunting, but for me personally, I went through a lot, but I've also learned a lot, not just about myself, not just about prison in general, but just about the world and how they view prisoners. And I feel that prison is based on not necessarily the justice system, but from what I've experienced, it's punishment versus rehabilitation. And in my experience, I've learned that in order to be rehabilitated, and this is one thing my parents told me, that if I can live my prison term and actually term and come out a decent person, then I've used the prison experience for me. But I've seen that not very many women have had, and maybe I can speak for men, have had the opportunity to use the programs to their benefit. Yes, there are programs available, but actually utilizing the program to make yourself better, I think, is not just related to rehabilitation, but I think you have to be habilitated, meaning when you go to prison, when the Department of Corrections says you're going to be rehabilitated, from what I've learned about the word rehabilitation, it's being able to learn or understand what you've already been exposed to and exercise that, practice that. But when you're being habilitated, you're being exposed to something new, different from what you're used to. And so many people who are incarcerated have not been exposed to the life that a lot of politicians have developed for us. And I think that makes the prison system unfair to a lot of people who are incarcerated, mostly to Black people, to people who are underprivileged, to people who are minorities. And being habilitated means you're being exposed to something different, something better, something that will give you a better quality of life, as opposed to, well, this is what people want from me, this is what I'm going to do. And therefore, the prison experience is really based on every individual. But that's not how the prison system is designed.
Jeffrey, 1 out of 3 Black Americans end up in prison. Staggering. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's tough when you really look at the numbers, when you look at it like that. You said 1 out of
3.
3. When you look at 1 out of 3, America has the highest prison rate in the world. But yet, we are about 5% of the world?
Isn't that sad?
We hold about 5% of the population, but we have about 25% of the prison population. Is a problem.
Yep.
It all comes back to looking at it as prison system is a business.
Right.
So
Yep.
they have these mandatory sentences for a crime. Why not let a jury decide how much should a person possibly, if you put in your trust into a jury that you supposedly have opportunity to fairly pick these jurors
Right.
to help represent you or to see things because they understand where you came from. Why not give them opportunity as they're looking and going through this trial with you, see how things unfold? It's just not about the crime that happened. It has a lot to do with what led up to the crime. Because if you're telling me that I'm responsible, that I've never learned how not to react in violence when somebody made me upset, I'm responsible for that. That's what you're telling me. But my whole childhood, my community taught me this. The adults around me taught me this. You know, in my household, the smallest things would have got you a butt whooping. You got somebody upset, you better be ready to fight. So as a kid growing up, this is what I learned. When I went to school, it was constant. You know, we kind of like in the same community, so we kind of raised the same way. Somebody piss you off, you fight. So it's kind of like they use these dynamics and just, it's not about that no more. It's about, all right, this is the crime. This is the crime, this is what you did, you're responsible for. absolutely, you're responsible for that crime, but it should have, your sentence should have something to do with the whole thing. This is why it's a trial, to determine your character, determine where you at in life, where you were going in life. What was your upbringing like? It has a lot to do what led you to that crime. It shouldn't be just the crime.
Tell me about a little bit about your mom and your dad growing up. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Rochester, New York,
Rochester.
in upstate Western New York.
Tell me a little bit about life growing up, huh?
Okay, my story is very complicated, but it is one I'm willing to share. I am actually adopted, and I was in the system from when I was 8. I went into foster care when I was 8, and that's when I met my parents and my brothers. My brothers were infants. So I started going to the church that my dad started preaching at the church that I grew up in, and that's how I met him. And I was fortunate enough to have him counsel my biological mother, but unfortunately, because she wasn't really doing what she needed to do for the courts to actually get me back, I went into the system, I stayed in the system, my parents decided to adopt me, and from there I had a lot of growing up to do. But before I went with them, I was actually exposed to a lot of violence, a lot of mishap, hostility, anything, you name it, just a lot of abuse. And by the time my parents got me, they had to do so much work to try to heal my wounds, my emotional wounds. And because I was actually trying to learn from what they were teaching me, I wasn't good at it, obviously. So that was basically one reason why I ended up in the prison system.
So Freud, the psychologist, well,
Yes.
says the child is being formed between 0 and 6.
Right.
So, and
Right.
if you're seeing a lot of abuse and a lot of violence, and the neighborhood is like that,
Right.
that's
Right.
an accident waiting to happen, huh?
Right.
Jump in.
Well-
Tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. Lived there for 24 years.
Boy, that's a tough city, isn't it?
It is very tough. They actually have a lot of shows and movies and things of that nature that is based on the living environment of Baltimore City. I've been away for about 12 years now due to incarceration. But first, before the incarceration, I went to the military at 24 years old. It was hard finding a job, so I made the decision, a constant and a well-paying job. So I made the decision at 24 to join the military. It took me a while to actually say yes, and make my pledge and go in. And when I did, I enjoyed it for the first 3 years. My last year, in which I was in Iraq, stationed at Camp Spiker, I was introduced to what we call in the military and what we call at the Veterans Administration military sexual trauma, which came from a higher up, and which then introduced me to the prison industrial system. When I got back, it was like 90 days from coming from Iraq to being in America for a little while, and I was hospitalized after a car accident. I was hospitalized for PTSD. I was unfortunately just not myself. But my decision to go in, I do not regret, for the reasons that I could have been in a whole different situation, because the environment in which I was in, though I come from a religious family, the streets are separate from the church. And so you come to a decision making when you're young. Do I follow that road in the streets? Will I survive there? You're going to encounter it either way. But I had decided to go to school and stick to my spiritual upbringing, in a sense. But when I found myself in prison, it all was almost like, for what? What was the reason even joining if I thought that I was going to have a different path than the one that could have led me in the same place that I end up in New York? So actually, I'm here in New York still on parole, and I would have chose anywhere in the world to be. After traveling the world, I would have chosen any place to be besides New York. Southern girls. Honestly.
Charles, tell me a little bit about your mom, your dad growing up.
Sure. Judith, thanks for serving our country.
Yes.
I always
Thank
wanna
you.
say
Yes.
that, especially as a female, I'm sure that wasn't the easiest thing. But my story growing up, I'm from Memphis. I'll say this, I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, moved to Buffalo, New York at the age of 3. Unfortunately, at the age of 3, my mom was murdered. She was stabbed 17 times by my stepfather, and I don't know who my father is. my birth certificate, which is one of the most embarrassing things to me. It's list unknown where the name father goes. So that's always troubled me. I was raised by my uncle and aunt, my mother's brother and sister, and my grandmother lived next door. I have 2 siblings, one older, one younger brother. I'm the deprived middle child, as I would always say. And, you know, growing up with my uncle, he adopted us at a young age. You know, well, not actually adopted us, he became our guardian. He was only like 23 years old at the time. And so looking back now, I would say that I probably was not raised with any guidance. I was provided a house with a roof over my head, but as far as, you know, any type of loving and nurturing, I would say that I didn't have that. The closest thing that I got to it was my grandmother. And I would always say to this day, there's nothing like a grandmother's love. So that's been my rock. And then when she died, that kind of like rocked my world. So the same year, unfortunately, that she passed away is the same year that I committed my crime.
I want to toss this out and have you all kind of jump into it. Somebody once said that the job of a parent or parents is to teach the kid, you're good, you're lovable, you're capable, you're worthwhile, you're important. And if the messages you're getting are you're not good, you're not lovable, you're not capable, you're not worthwhile, you're not important, is an explosion.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about the environment. You put your finger on it. You've all kind of put your finger on it. But when you say, you know, it was very violent, it was very abusive. When you talk about your mother being murdered, you know, what is that violence like? So the folks at home can, I can see that you're almost recalling it as I'm asking the question.
Well, actually, I'm troubled about Charles' situation. I can only imagine what it's like to have my mother killed at such a young age, but I also know what it's like to be separated from my mother as a result of abuse, and that is something that I will have to live with for the rest of my life. Like what you just mentioned, if you're told you're not worthy, you're not lovable, all the above, then it really does affect your psyche, affects your mental and your emotional states. And this is what I've been living with basically for almost my entire life, just to have that come from my biological mother. And as a result of those injunctions, I was always living the life as if I were all of those things. And no matter how much my adopted parents, my parents now, have tried to instill in me the importance of knowing that I am lovable in spite of what I've gone through, in spite of what I put them through, it was always difficult for me to use their encouraging words to go against what I was used to. And it made a very big difference in how I related to people, how I wanted people to relate to me, how successful I wanted to be. Even though I had this broad idea of what success looked like for me, I could never attain it because of my own insecurities. And it's certain things I still struggle with. And in prison, it was even more difficult because I was just dealing with so much negativity. So as a result of what I was learning as a child, I was not really able to accomplish the goals I set out for myself.
Go ahead.
I would just say, just to piggyback off what Anitria said, I missed that loving and nurturing growing up. It was not, you know, something that, like, I feel that in my life that was what was missing, like the parents' love, because I didn't get that from my uncle. I didn't get that from my aunt, you know, that reinforcement that, you know, that parent gives you. That's my child. I love him. He's going to be successful. Right. I missed that. And I will say that the nature of my mother's murder did not really have an influence on me because I was 3 when it happened, so I really didn't understand why she died. It wasn't until I was 19 that I really read the newspaper article which described the case. So the violence that, you know, caused her death wasn't something that was introduced to me at a young age.
Judah, let me ask you this. I know Baltimore because it's right next door to Washington, you know, and it's in the news all the time.
All the time.
Spent a lot of time through the DMV.
When they talk about the violence on the streets, can you educate us a little bit about that and how that impacts a young girl growing up?
Yeah. Well, I come from a home where my mother was schizoaffective and undiagnosed until she was in her 40s. And my dad was incarcerated by the time I was 5, so I didn't have too much interaction with him. I was predominantly raising myself, and then I had my whole family by the time I was 15 available. They just were not really involved. I think it's each their own child to raise. So a lot of my lessons coming up from Baltimore were going from one place to another, just traveling to go to work or going to school. I started off working by the time I was 14, held 2 jobs from 16 until 24. So it is very much a violent city until today, and I haven't been back there for 12 years. And I find that even when my 24-year-old niece, who is now, when this happened, what I'm about to describe happened to her, she was 22. She was standing on a bus stop, and someone who probably needed mental health therapy or help just looked at her and said, "I will kill you." And he got in her face. And unfortunate thing about that is that's a common thing. You grow up on defense. And that's something I didn't always have great defenses. I was more reactionary to whatever would come, but being soft-spoken and not really having much of guidance or being taught how to have some type of firm backbone or assert myself. I found myself in a lot of victim positions, which I think in some ways, with the great help of the Veterans Administration and therapy from there, I have a great therapist who has helped me to overcome some things and some challenges. And I think the entire Black community probably needs to reconsider how we feel about therapy itself. Sometimes it could be a place where it could expose you and leave you bare, and sometimes that's a good thing. So we have to find some commonality where we utilize those systems in place for the betterment of just our nation itself.
Jeffrey, you were nodding your head. As you, what was coming into your mind? I could read something in there.
It's basically the whole, for me, like she just said, growing up on defense.
Yeah, that's right.
I grew up on defense. Like, I constantly had to defend, fight, defend. It was never like, I was never exposed or put in situations where I can just go and just be a child or just be me and just enjoy. It was always, I constantly, when I walk down the street, I have to constantly watch and see, is there anybody out that's going to try to rob me? Is there anybody that's going to try to attack me? Sometimes they had this thing called face fighting.
Right.
Where, and I was exposed to this probably at the age of 8. I remember the first time experiencing that. So face fighting is basically you walking down the street and somebody just, you minding your business, somebody just catch your eyes.
It's a nonverbal
and they
communication.
just start like, so if you turn your head and put your head down, they'll mess with you. It's kind of like a sign of weakness. But if you stare so long, it becomes, what's your problem? What you looking at? You know me somewhere, you want beef? So it was kind of like a no-win situation. Then I'm raised in between 9 boys. I'm like the middle of 9 boys growing up in the household. I was adopted into a family as well, me and 2 of my brothers. And like I'm in the middle of older and younger children. So I have 2 younger brothers that was with me. And from a young age, I constantly been fighting up and down to pretty much to protect me and my brothers. It was kind of like an environment where we all loved each other, we all got along. However, it was just that you're not blood.
Right.
And that would stem certain things, like they would get certain treatment that we wouldn't get.
Yep.
Or let's say, for instance, everybody just got new jeans or something and we didn't get anything. So I would sneak it with one of the guys' jeans at school. So now when I came home, it was like, oh, you stealing or you doing this? And
Yeah. I remember.
and
days
now
like that too.
I got to fight because I wore someone's jeans to school because I didn't have the same jeans that they had. I didn't have the same type of love from the family that they were getting. I will not dare say that the family didn't care for me. I learned a lot from the family. However, it just was harder for me and my brothers than it were for the rest of them. And then at a young age, my mother had me at a young age. My mom was about 14, 15 when she gave birth to me. She was a drug addict. She eventually turned her life around and sobered up and cleaned up. But this is something that I had to go through. Drug addict, my mom was constantly abused. I was raised away from my mother because of that. And it was just knowing that she was being abused. It was just knowing that she was a drug addict. It was just wishing that I can be around her and be there with her. Me and my brothers can be there, and not having that. And people in in the family that I was raised with were constantly talking down on her, constantly talking down on her. So in my mind, I gotta create this barrier of, this is my mother. I don't care what y'all say.
Yeah. Next time on This Is America in the World, we'll hear about crimes and punishments and the unique and successful Rehabilitation Through the Arts program. For information about This Is America in the World, visit our website, thisisamerica.net, or our YouTube channel, This Is America TV, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This Is America in the World is brought to you by Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology, sharing tomorrow. The Washington Diplomat, a world of news and perspective. The Sultanate of Oman. The U.S.-China Education Trust and F.Y. Chang Foundation, Julia Chang Block, President. The Rotendaro Family Trust. The Forerunner Foundation, dedicated to forward-thinking public policy. And the Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings.